So I don't see them as carrying much weight. The Iranians will negotiate with them. The Dr. Araghchi said, I think, that his deputy will. I'm not sure if he said it, but the Iranians stated that the Iranian deputy foreign minister will meet deputy foreign ministers of the E3 after negotiations with the United States, which did not happen last week. I assume that if they do happen this week, these talks will take place. But the very fact that they'll be carried out by deputy foreign ministers shows that the Iranians don't take them nearly as seriously as the negotiations being carried out by the minister. The foreign minister, after negotiating he goes to China, he goes to Russia, he goes to friendly countries to keep them informed. And then they say, okay, we'll send the deputy foreign minister to speak to the Europeans. I think that's basically sending a strong message, and it's pointing out what I've been explaining.
Just to throw in, Professor Marandi, you might know who said this, but there was a saying back in the early days of the nuclear issue: why drive a Pajak when you could drive a Mercedes? Meaning, why negotiate with Europe when you can negotiate with the United States? And so I think Iran's always had not a very good attitude towards the Europeans when it comes to being good, faithful negotiation partners. Did I get that quote right?
It's something like that. Yes, that has always been stated, and it's always been clear. The Europeans have always been sending messages back, and
because he has to emerge from everything he does as the dominant person, as the victor, and everybody else can't be equal. They must be defeated. This is why, now that I can speak freely, Professor Marandi, Iran shouldn't trust this man as far as they can throw him. And I know you know that. But this is a man incapable of entering the kind of deal that would be needed. Obama, at least, had enough humility to say, we have to make a compromise. So he went from no spinning centrifuges to accepting Iran's nuclear enrichment program. That's what we need to do today. We need to back away from our hardline position and make a compromise. This president can't do that because he views that as a humiliation, as a sign of weakness, instead of the sign of greatness that it is. A man great enough to make compromises to bring about peace. He can't make any compromises, and so now he's made the situation much worse. Iran has linked its national pride, its national honor, its dignity, its sovereignty, everything that a nation uses to define themselves. Iran has linked to their peaceful nuclear program, their nuclear enrichment program, and they simply aren't going to give that up, especially not to Donald Trump and his bluster. So Trump's in a problem right now where there is a solution, but politically, he's blocked the solution. He's demanding complete dismantlement of Iran's program. Iran won't go for that. Therefore, that opens up war, which we can't win unless we use nuclear weapons. Trump is his own worst enemy on this one. He is literally floundering, and it's because of Marco Rubio. I have to say, Mike Waltz, I believe, was working with the Israelis behind the scenes, and he got called out, and Rubio had him fired. I think this is a power play by Rubio because now Rubio is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, which creates a whole bunch of constitutional issues. But now he is the man running the totality of the foreign policy, national security policy for the United States. And Marco Rubio is incapable of dealing responsibly with Iran. He is the worst possible candidate as a man being the interlocutor between the United States and Iran. The same thing with Russia. He has caused whatever passed for a peace effort to collapse. Marco Rubio is a tool of the Zionists, a tool of Netanyahu, and Trump is a prisoner of these people. And so now we see what he's done here, this collapse of he's a man who has no concept of reality. He lives in his own narcissistic fueled world. He is upset. I'll tell you my belief. He's upset because he's not in Moscow at the center of attention at the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. He could have been, but see, it wouldn't have been on terms that made him God, because Trump is somebody who believes that he is God. He has said so. I have the power of God, he says. I have godlike capabilities. That alone should bring down a lightning bolt from heaven. But he can't be on the stage with Vladimir Putin when Vladimir Putin is in a superior position. And he certainly won't share a stage with Putin and Xi Jinping, the president of China, who's there now as the guest of honor instead of Donald Trump. Trump is a narcissist, and that narcissism, Netanyahu almost immediately responded and said this wasn't true. Now, he has a reason to say that because he doesn't want to admit that he was carrying out behind the scenes discussions with the National Security Advisor that the President of the United States wasn't aware of. And Netanyahu isn't a man known for his ability to adhere to the truth. So I would take Netanyahu's statement with a grain of salt, but I also take the statement of the White House with a grain of salt because the Trump administration is not known for its honesty. What I do believe is happening is that the Trump administration's mouth has written a check that the American body is not prepared to cash. In posturing and threatening military force, we have done a repeat of what Barack Obama did in 2014. If you remember, and Professor Marandi knows as well, in 2012, 2013, Obama was making statements about if Iran, we will not tolerate an Iranian nuclear bomb. If Iran is going to build one, we will use military force. All options are on the table. And then in 2014, when it became clear that Iran wasn't going to be intimidated and to back down, Obama had no choice but to change the American policy from not one spinning centrifuge to, I think Russia's a very realistic, pragmatic country governed by people who are grounded in reality. Russia knows what happened and knows what has happened over the past. Russia knows the policies of the United States towards the Soviet Union and then towards Russia. Russia knows what happened in the 1990s. Russia knows what the United States was doing in Ukraine. Russia knows what America's strategic policy objectives are. And Russia knows that America is no friend of Russia. You have a president come along who claims that he wants to take a different trajectory, that maybe we could be friends. Maybe we don't have to have this strategic animosity. And Russia pragmatically allows that door to be opened, but not
whether it was out of weakness or out of dishonesty or both, probably both. They had no positive impact with regards to the nuclear issue. Also, right now, when we look at Gaza, the Europeans play the same role as the United States. Some European countries have been giving enormous aid to the Israeli regime, the Germans, the British, but also we see that friends of ours are being arrested, they're being harassed simply for speaking out against genocide, simply for pointing out facts. People are being arrested for carrying Palestinian flags and rallies, not even Muslims. Jews are being harassed, people are being expelled from university, people who we know, that I don't want to name any of them because I'll forget other names which would not be fair, but that is Europe today. And Europe, of course, is also a diminishing entity. It's a diminishing power. We see the divisions within Europe on the one hand. We see the decline in European strength and power economically, the sanctions imposed on Russia, the Russians. So Europe is weaker. Europe supporting genocide. Europe is becoming authoritarian. And we see what they're doing with elections. I'm no fan of some of these political parties, but they lecture to us, but they do exactly what they criticize others for. And as I said, they've never played any positive role with regards to the nuclear negotiations, despite promising otherwise. So
this would require a level of introspection that can only come with humility and intelligence. And this administration isn't known for either. Probably the best positioned is Tulsi Gabbard, but she's not a policymaker. She provides intelligence. And you saw with her, when she did her threat assessment, global threat assessment, the assessment she put out about Iran was a very specific assessment designed to create the potential for negotiation. She did her job, and she has been advocating against military action against Iran, but she's been pushed to the side by both the National Security Advisor is now fired and now
trying to figure out how to sell oil, how to sell products, how to import, how to get spare parts, and how to deal with planes that need spare parts. And so there was a lot of cooperation. And what Iran learned the hard way over many years, the Russians were able to learn very swiftly and to overcome many of those problems. Iran, too, has obviously gained a lot from the experiences of the past, and by helping the Russians, Iran gained further Russian friendship. Today, as I was explaining earlier, and as Scott also pointed out, because of the changing relationships that we're seeing in the world between Iran and Russia, between Iran and China, between countries across the global south, we just recently saw, as you both know, and as I'm sure your audience knows, the son of the king of Saudi Arabia, the minister of defense, come to Tehran. There's a lot of debate going on. However, there is a unity now in Iran that this guy is crazy. This guy, you can't deal with him. Now, it may be not fully accurate, it may be exaggerated, it may be right, it may be wrong. That's not the point here. It's, in my opinion, is to a large degree correct, but that's not the point. The point is that in this way, he's a gift to the Iranian government. He's a gift to the Chinese government. And he's a gift to many governments who want to resist. It was a warning shot. The fact that it had such a high degree of maneuverability, I think, is indication of that. And Scott is right. Yemen has gone through much worse before, actually. When the Saudis attacked, and we should remember that Obama gave the Saudis the green light to attack Yemen. So he's not really any different from Biden or Trump. But when he gave the green light, it was not just Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Qatar and Turkey and the whole region, all of the countries in the region that are aligned to the United States, they supported the onslaught. And the British were sending advisors, especially for the Air Force. The Americans were in the Red Sea helping enforce a blockade. The Canadians, Europeans, everyone was a part of this genocidal campaign. And they bombed weddings. They bombed a funeral once where roughly 1,000 people were killed at that funeral. So all the atrocities that you can think of were carried out back then. But gradually, Yemen grew stronger, and ultimately, their drone and missile capabilities increased so much that the Saudis felt that they had to stop fighting, and they agreed to a ceasefire because Yemen was striking Saudi oil installations and creating. And I would also add an agreement that he actually signed, because when it comes to the JCPOA, of course, he tore up the deal. But the Gaza ceasefire was his ceasefire. We were told, at least, who knows, but we were told that on a Saturday he went and read the riot act to Netanyahu and forced a ceasefire the day before Trump became president. But then, literally weeks later, he was the one who undermined his own ceasefire by saying the Palestinians must go, they must be ethnically cleansed, and then the Israelis reimposed Netanyahu, the Israelis, they reimposed the starvation siege, and as a result, Yemen said they'll shut down the Red Sea again to ships linked to the regime. And then he gave the green light for the genocide to restart. So on the one hand, he made a promise in Ukraine, never fulfilled. He had a deal that he carried. It was his deal. He effectively was the one who tore up his own deal. And then, of course, in the tariff war, we see that he has no solution. It seems clear to me that they did not think this through. And this is the person that Iran's looking at. They're looking at his track record. They're looking at the people around him and saying, okay, let's say somehow this guy, we have a deal. Let's say even though he keeps changing his position, he's been changing his position for the last few weeks. But let's say somehow Trump is able to close his mouth. And
again, what McCain became after that, I despise. But his service, it deserves recognition as being honorable. And Donald Trump was unable to do that because he's a very petty man. A very petty man. Donald Trump went after an American judge of Hispanic origin, saying that no Hispanic should ever be judging me. This is a man who has total disregard. In that same interview, he spoke about the Constitution, saying, I don't know, Fourth Amendment? No, I may not do it. How? He's the president who took an oath to the Constitution. Now he's saying that he's not going to implement it, that he doesn't know if he's going to implement it. Then I know that you shouldn't be president of the United States, and this is the reality. But he was running against the candidate, Kamala Harris, who I still believe to this day, had she been elected, we might have already had a nuclear war with Russia. We were headed in that direction. One thing you can say about Donald Trump is that we entered into active negotiations with the Russians. They have failed, they have collapsed, but at least we were talking.
The brother of the Crown Prince, bringing a message from the king. And the language used during that trip by the defense minister was quite extraordinary. And Ayatollah Khamenei, he met him, he received him, which I think was very significant. That usually does not happen. He said something that I thought, and some of my friends also think, was very significant. He said that we'd be happy to give pass on our scientific knowledge to Saudi Arabia, which I think it was clear that he was alluding to Iran's nuclear program and enrichment. I'm not saying that the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to be ideal. Iran, of course, is
authorities into Western Iraq to try and stop the Iraqis from launching missiles against Israel unsuccessfully. Right now, the United States is unsuccessful. And I think Yemen is in a very strong position right now. The threat of an aerial blockade backed up by the reality of a Yemeni missile that can penetrate Israel and American air defense is something that every party has to take into account. Iran hinted at something when they announced this new missile that they've developed and tested. They said that this missile incorporated technologies that were specifically brought to bear because of anti-ballistic missile efforts by Israel and the United States demonstrated in Operations True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. That means that Iran has an active intelligence collection and feedback mechanism where they can see how the enemy responds and make adjustments to this. I would believe, and I'm not making allegations here, I'm just saying it's my belief that there's probably some intelligence sharing between Iran and Yemen where these lessons learned have been shared with the Yemeni and been incorporated into Yemen's own missile. I don't believe Yemen deliberately missed the Ben Gurion airport. I believe this was an offset strike. I do that based upon just simple observations, but this was an accelerated warhead that undertook numerous maneuvers to get where it's at, showing capabilities that lend themselves to precision. And so I don't believe that Yemen would undertake everything and then miss. I think that this was a deliberate miss to send a signal. But if Iran were to go in there and show that it can do serious harm to Israel, serious harm, and still have reserve capacity to finish the job, Israel will have to take some action, and the United States will have to make a choice. Are we going to commit suicide on behalf of Israel, or are we going to have to back down? But this is a man-child that we have here. This is literally the worst president the American people have ever elected because he's so unpresidential. I despise Joe Biden, but Joe Biden could be presidential at times when his brain functioned. Even when his presidential behavior I opposed. I was against the policies. This is a man who can't be presidential. He's incapable of being presidential because to be presidential, you have to have humility to the Constitution, humility and fealty to the Constitution, and humility before the American people and the world. If you're going to be the world's strongest man, then you have to be a man capable of being humble with that strength. And Donald Trump isn't the strongest man. He's a weak man. He bends to all the pressure that's put on him. He doesn't know what he stands for, except if Donald Trump doesn't emerge number one, then he doesn't want to do it. That's not how the world works. The world isn't built to make Donald Trump